foot per second, Houston. Roger. Bye-bye, Skylab.
The story of the launch of the Skylab Orbital Workshop is one of those great triumphs of things going bad and engineers and humans and astronauts working together to fix them.
They have a very successful, almost month-long mission, and proved that, in fact, first that the Skylab will work, that humans are really important to those things, and to get a lot of good scientific data. And of course, we had 2 more crews that launched later in the year. The second Skylab crew goes up for a longer period, and does lots of Earth science experiments, lots of solar observations. And then the third crew finally launches at the end of 1973 and early into 74. They're up for almost 3 months, and they observe, do solar observations, do more Earth observations. We do experiments with students. The first NASA student experiments go on during Skylab. The last crew leaves Skylab in early 1974, so a very successful program overall, despite the fact that it almost, on the first minute of operations, almost went in the drink.
One of the real triumphs of Skylab is that it basically took a situation gathering both the limits of what was possible and the possibilities presented by incredible technological developments and put them together in a program that produced tremendous benefits in science, education, what spaceflight is all about. So it's a stepping stone. It was the stepping stone between the Apollo program and then later definitions of what spaceflight would mean for the United States.
Skylab is the first step. We learn how to operate in space. We build on that with the ISS. We now go on further beyond low Earth orbit to visit an asteroid and then onto Mars. That's the plan, and that's where we're going.
All right, thank you. That was great, and thank you to our historian, Dr. Bill Brary, who's here with us today, for participating in that. So we're going to get into the discussion now. As we mentioned earlier, if you're following along with us at Twitter, you can send us your questions using the hashtag AskNASA. And the discussion will be followed at hashtag Skylab. We're also taking your questions at Google Plus and Facebook. But before we get started with our audience questions as well, I have a couple questions for the panelists. And I'd like first to start with Owen and Jerry, because we just watched this great video that told us a little bit about the official history of Skylab. I was hoping, starting with Owen, you could tell us a little bit about your impressions and what we should know about it.
Well, there's so many things. As a matter of fact, if you're asking about basic material, there's a 500-page book that David Hitt, myself, and Joe Kerwin published about 4 or 5 years ago. And that will tell you far more detail than we will be able to accommodate here this afternoon. But I think it did take the first step into living in space, homesteading space, we call it here. And I think that's essentially what the program provided. It verified the fact that people could live, work, do productive things for long durations, and then it also took the first steps into the science that we also wanted to have on board. So that's in a nutshell the kinds of things, long duration and useful science that were above the atmosphere, so we could see in ultraviolet X-ray wavelengths, which we cannot see from the ground.
Well, I think some of the other things that were accomplished operationally on Skylab was that we dealt with problems having to do with scheduling and productivity. And we came to some solutions that worked very well. It took a while to get there. But those solutions that we came across were used on subsequent missions to some degree, and some of the lessons had to be learned all over again. But that's the nature of the space business, I think. The productivity is the most important thing. You've got to be able to get things done up there, and if you don't get things done, then public money is being wasted.
Well, and speaking of continuity, we've now had folks on the International Space Station for 13 years, and one of those individuals is Kevin Ford. And so, Kevin, I was wondering if you could share with me and all of our audience here a little bit about your training and maybe how it compared to the Skylab folks and how you got ready to go to space.
Absolutely. Well, first let me just say what an honor it is to be here with these two gentlemen. Skylab really represents something to us, which was the first long duration, stays in space. And there's a lot of uncertainty when you go. You know, everybody has a little bit of angst, I suppose. How am I going to stay there for a long time? In my case, I was expected to stay about 4.5 months, and you have some butterflies involved with doing that. But when you get up there, you know that people have been here before, and other crews even before me, of course, on Space Station had been there and had a lot of things that they could tell me, but really the Space Station was built around what we learned from the Skylab, what they put up there for us, the way the modules were sized and the way they were constructed in space and all that kind of stuff came out of what we learned from Skylab. The training now involves just so much, and I'm sure they had the same types of things. A lot of, you know, you have to think about the basics first, just living in space and medical operations. We were our own doctors, for example, in space. All that stuff is important. It takes a lot of training, especially for somebody like a pilot. You know, if you're going to teach me how to pull a tooth, you're going to need some time to do it. So there's a lot of training involved for the basics, but then also, of course, we're up there for the science, and we get to go to all the centers, not only in the U.S. but overseas as well, to learn about the science and how to do that. And take care of the assets we have on board, and of course take care of the space station. So a lot of elements to the training. It's about 2.5 years involved in it now for a 5 to 6 month stay.
And speaking of that science, that was perfect, Kevin. It was like we have a show going here. Marshall Porterfield can tell us a lot about that science, and I think he had a fairly similar job to a job that Owen also had at NASA in terms of space exploration. Tell us a little bit about the experiments we're doing on station now and how that relates to some of the history, what we learned with Skylab.
Well, in terms of the link to the history of Skylab, it really the productivity that they had during that time period is noteworthy. They conducted over 2,500 separate individual investigations in the area of heliophysics, astrophysics, Earth observation, engineering and technology development, life sciences, and also did student experiments on Skylab. And that's over three Skylab missions over 171 days. So incredible level of productivity that we are working towards matching right now in terms of ISS utilization. So we've had crew up there for almost 13 years.
And Jason, who's here from our advanced exploration work, you know, right now it takes 14 minutes to get a signal to Mars, right? So some of what we're learning, the communications work that went from Skylab to Earth, from ISS to Earth. Now we're working on these systems that will be able to get us even further. Can you tell us a little bit about what this work that we've done has informed what we're going to do to get to an asteroid and onto Mars?
Yeah, I mean, even Skylab a period of times, we had real loss of signal. We didn't have continuous comm. You go to something like this weekend when we're doing an EVA, and we have not only near continuous communications, but we also have near continuous video of things as the operation is going on. We're actually going to, as we go further and further from Earth, we're going to actually revert back to the loss of signal kind of style of communications, where those time delays will increase to a point that real-time communications doesn't make sense. That planning and the orchestrating of the mission challenges becomes even more important. You don't have the ground support crew every day right on the comm loop with you, or you'll be slightly delayed or offset, so you have to have more autonomous systems. You have to have the crew be able to replan events in a more autonomous way or automatically by themselves. As the crew sees something happen, they can replan their day right away to try to minimize that communication loss in order to keep the productivity up at the same time. So that communications delay is going to be one of the biggest challenges of how we change our operational paradigm. And in some ways we can actually look back at Skylab as a reference to how that was done. And actually learn from that going forward versus actually what we do with Station today, which is very, very continuous communications. So.
Great. We're going to get ready to take some questions from the audience, but I have one more for Jerry and Owen, because we're exploring space, but we think we're alone in this universe. But when you got to Skylab, you found out we're not alone. And I wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about what you found when you arrived for Skylab 4 mission and what the folks on Owen's crew left for you.
Well, when we finished docking with the Skylab vehicle, with the lab, of course, Mission Control wouldn't let us get out and go in. We had to spend the night in the command module. So by the next morning, we were clawing at the door, ready to go to work. We went in there, and Ed went in first, as I remember, and he said, "Hey, Jerry, come and look at this." And I said, "What?" He said, "Come and look." Well, we went down to the living area, And sure enough, sitting on the pot was a dummy with I don't remember I don't know whose name was on it, but one of our names was on it. Another one was on a bicycle and had his feet attached to the bicycle. And the third one was, as I remember, in the wardroom, standing behind the table eating. So we said, okay, those guys did it to us. We've got to find a way to get even.
That's a good one. I really enjoyed that story. Let's take some questions from the audience. Thank you guys. And we've got one right down here.
Hi, Jeff Wallace, Rocketman 528 on Twitter. I've met your son at South by Southwest, a rather entertaining character. Can you talk a little bit about how you inspired him to want to go to space, Owen?
Well, you're referring to the fact that my son Richard has also had the opportunity to go to space. We're in fact the only father-son pair in the U.S. who has had that opportunity. And so I did not know I was doing it at the time. For one thing, it is so unusual to have this opportunity to go to space in whatever capacity, as a pilot or as a scientist or whatever. I didn't to push him in that direction at all. I knew he was interested in it, but I had no idea that he really had that as an objective in his life. And I was surprised some years later to find that he had indeed worked with companies, and he was one of those people who would be able to fly with the Russians on Soyuz up to the ISS. And so it came as a surprise to me, actually, when I found out that he had acted upon his wishes, which I had not particularly encouraged. I certainly didn't discourage it, but I didn't encourage it because it was such a remote possibility. And so it was really something that Richard pretty much did on his own. And I was very pleased to assist or contribute to it, his success on that program, whenever I could.
Great. I think we've got a question coming to us from social media here. Trent, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Lauren. Okay, so we have a similar question that came into both Google Plus and Twitter, and it basically boils down to, and Dr. Porterfield started to touch on the legacy a little bit, but is there a big difference between the type of science that was conducted aboard the International Space Station compared to what they could conduct on Skylab?
Good question.
Who's that for? Who's that question for?
Maybe start with you.
They came from Twitter and Google Plus, similar to.
Was there a big difference between the science we did and what you guys do?
You want to address
Okay, well, I'm just going to say it's a growth prospect. I mean, we did the solar physics, for example, but you now can do the steps on beyond what we did on Skylab. And in some ways, you've completed some of the work, but you go to the next step. And so I would say the same general research areas are still there, but it's more advanced techniques that are now available with the longer durations and the improved hardware that we now have available after some 40 years, as you would expect. You want to add to that?
Well, I just might add that, it was built from the ground up, the International Space Station, to accommodate express-type payloads and new ideas with all kinds of plumbing, for vacuums and gases and power and cooling, just so that people could come in with ideas, even downstream, and still get them aboard. And today, regularly, we install new modules and new racks and new drawers and that sort of thing that are accommodated easily by the construction of the International Space Station modules, just to take on new science and ideas. And so far we've done really well with when people came in and said, man, here's what I would like to do on the space station. Usually the provisions are there to get that done. So it's very, very capable just to get the different types of science. There are also external platforms and, express logistics carriers on the outside, like we put AMS on the outside, kind of. Later on it was able to accommodate the alpha magnetic spectrometer, for example, at a later date. So it was really built to accommodate all this, and again, that was a bit of the legacy that they brought to us.
I just want to make a couple comments. The hardware that we have available now to do the science on the International Space Station is much more advanced, just because of the advancement of science in general. And we do have significant investment in hardware capabilities to do life and physical sciences research on the International Space Station. Just one example is that some fairly rudimentary experiments were done on Skylab with rice seedlings. On International Space Station, using the European cultivation module, we grow
Strict diet. We worked with the nutritionists before we left, set the diet, and then we could not vary from that